Hello, my merry gang of post-processing pixel peepers or whatever other P word I can come up with. Welcome back. It's only been a week, which is a bit unusual. So we said last week we're going to try and do a few more of these sessions to try and do some catching up. And this one is the first of them, I guess. So absolutely welcome to those people that are live. To those people that aren't live and watching this later, where were you? Anyway, for those that are live, please, as we're going on today, put stuff into the comments, put any questions in there. If I do something that doesn't make sense, if I do something you don't agree with, if you want some more clarification, then please put it in there. We'll try and get to as many of your questions as possible. But we're going to spend the next hour in that program, as always, Capture One, which is a post-processing tool. It is not, interestingly, a pixel editing tool for the pixel peepers out there, but we're going to touch on that today because there was a question or an image that's come in that Capture One is the wrong application for it. And I think sometimes knowing what the right application is helps you get the best out of the application that you're trying to use for something that may not be quite the right application. So, JD, first time you could attend in 6 months. It's almost like a report card, isn't it? But well done. We're at that's one time in a year. Let's go for two. Let's double it. So for everyone that is, as I say, online and live, we're going to be hopefully making this interactive. For those of you that are watching later, by all means, put stuff into the comments. If there's something that's a question or a query, we'll try and cover it later on as you guys sort of catch up. So here's a weird one for me because we've done this relatively soon or recently. There's no change in version since the last one. So just like last week, we are editing today on 16.4.2. That's the current as of right now, because it sometimes surprises me in the morning. That's the current version of Capture One for a Mac. Little asterisk. If you're on a PC, you only need 16.4.1. 16.4.2 was a bug fix specifically for a Mac issue. So whether it's 16.4.1 or 16.4.2 on a Mac, great, you're on the latest one. If you are not on the latest one, do not worry, do not be afraid. You can be using Capture One version 15, which was 22 in marketing speak, because it was launched in 2022. And most of the stuff that we're going to cover will also apply. Anything like AI masks will not. Because they sort of came in later on, and there's some other stuff around dust removal and keystoning automatically and so on that got introduced later on. Version 14, again, most of the basics. Remember, it is a key thing, this. Remember that most of Capture One's basics have been there since day zero. So when we're talking about most, and apart from any intricate stuff, but most edits for most images, we're probably using the same standard tools that were there 3 versions, 4 versions, 5 versions ago, if not longer. So don't worry too much about versioning. Obviously, going on to the latest version gives you better camera support. It probably fixes most of the bugs that you might have come across, with a challenge that obviously with software, sometimes we see new ones. But you should ideally be on the latest version that you can use. Doesn't necessarily mean the latest version. So don't worry if you're not on the latest version. But if you see a feature that you want, then that's what you need to do. To do that, if you're on a perpetual license, as of the latest couple of releases, if you bought your license outright, so to speak, you will have to pay to upgrade to any major point release, which is the 0.4 bit. So if you bought whatever 16.2, and you want to get a 16.4, it's a paid upgrade for the guys on Perpetual. If you're on a subscription or on an all-in-one basis, then knock yourselves out. You can go to the download section, download it. It's not, I love this, so please remember, it's not a free update, you're paying for it. That's what your subscription is. So please utilize your subscription, get the most out of it by shifting up. So, for those of you that are wondering how to get a file across, that is how. So pori4live.wetransfer.com. For those of you that want to know more stuff, well, number one, we've got this lot, which is all the pro tips stuff. So for little things around things like clarity or a specific thing about healing or a specific thing about luma ranges and masking and so on, there's very, very quick sort of bite-sized 2-minute videos there. We've also got that masterclass list, which is a lot more in depth. It's around an hour and a half on different subjects. You'll find the link for that down in the description, I think. If not, sorry, it'll be on our website. Anyway, let's get into Capture One. If there are no more questions, I don't think there are. Cool. So we're going to run through probably 5 or 6 images today, if we're on time, as it were. This one in from Bob. Very simple question. How do I accentuate the light streak? So this is the after image. And actually, just one other thing before we go into the actual editing side of this, I do want to stress one thing, and that's about workspaces. So a lot of you will see that my workspace is relatively standard. Most of that is because I have a workspace set up for these live sessions, and it's to keep it relatively generic so there's no surprises in there for anyone else. I have a slightly different workspace for landscape editing, but that's just around my preferences. You'll see that this toolbar up here has been altered from the standard. I would always add the edit selected option, because that can catch people out. The annotations option, just because I like turning them on and off. And guides. Guides is really handy for making sure you've got level horizons, especially in landscapes. Please do not show me an architectural picture or a seascape that doesn't have a level horizon. It upsets me greatly. The easiest way to do that is to turn on your guide, and then you can move these up and down. You can add new ones. So if you go into View, Customize Guides, you can add another horizontal or vertical. Great. And you can turn them off from the toolbar. So once you've got that set up, wonderful. You then go and add a new version of Capture One. And you go into Capture One and it's reset it. Oh no, disaster. It's not a disaster. What's happened is it's overridden your default or your current workspace with the latest one. And there is a reason for it. I see people complaining about it, but there is a reason for overwriting it. I'll give you 2 examples recently. The auto keystone tool. In fact, AI crop would be another one, but the other one would be dust removal. A lot of people did not know, even though they'd paid for the upgrade, even though they'd installed it, that the dust removal has a new button on there that says remove dust, which just does it automatically for most dust in your shot. What happens is when a new version comes out, Capture One will preload the workspace for the new version with the tools that have been introduced. So in other words, dust removal. If I'd used my previous workspace, or the one before that, or the one before that, let's say from Capture One 9, I wouldn't even know this tool existed unless I'd read the release notes, which comes on to another point. Please read the release notes before you update. But the reason that Capture One do the reset is to make sure that you can see and access the new tools. However, if you are aware of them and you want to get back to your old workspace, really easy. Window, Workspace, and you will find all of the workspaces you have ever used, saved, corrected, copied, whatever. Mine go way off this screen. So mine goes down to 7.1.2. So Capture One 7.1.2 was the first workspace that I have saved in here. I can go back to it. I could load in the one from 16.2.2, 16.0.1, 16.36, Capture One 14, Capture One 12. They're all saved. Now you can get rid of them in your library, in your file system, in Windows. But the better option, and it is generally the better option, is to save your workspace. So once you've got a workspace that works for you, just click on Save Workspace, give it a name, and you'll find, just like mine, it appears here. Now, if I want to update it, I just save it again, but give it exactly the same name and it'll overwrite it. But this means that, and by the way, the reason there's an underscore is to make sure it's always at the very top of the list, because obviously this list builds. But what that means is I'm not worried when I upgrade Capture One, my workspace resets, fine. I may have a little look at what the new tools are. I'll then go into my workspace, and if I need to add a new tool in there, I can. So if I'm missing one, dehaze, let's say, I can add it in. So right click anywhere in the tool area, add tool, and then choose the one that you want. Then save your workspace again. Okay, so a couple questions then as well. Sorry, while that one's come up. So Andreas, do I know if there are any problems when running 16.4.2 under macOS 14.5? I honestly don't know. And it can't be, 14.4 can't be downloaded from Apple. I'm just having a little quick look. I don't believe that there is necessarily an issue. I've not seen it. Just one thing to bear in mind with any support for Capture One, and actually for any application that's out there. So if, for instance, you're on Sonoma, which I'm running here, when you do an update to the operating system, you're risking the fact that the software developers haven't necessarily tested for the new one. You're also risking the fact that if something goes wrong, they may turn around and say, well, we haven't got a clue. We don't know what's happening with that version yet. We haven't certified it. We haven't got it supported. So good luck. Does it mean it won't run on a new operating system? Absolutely not. And in fact, to my knowledge, I can't remember a minor update to an OS that caused any major issues. There have certainly been major ones when the security changed around OS X. It was a couple of versions ago. That really did screw up quite a lot of applications. But generally speaking, the minor releases tend not to break much in the way of software. If I was running a commercial studio that was high-paced, needed a lot of throughput, had a huge number of people on set that were relying on the system working, would I update immediately? Absolutely no, I would not. I would wait until all, not just Capture One, but all of my software suppliers have said, yes, we've tested it on the latest version. Does it mean it will break? No, it doesn't. Does it mean it's likely to? Probably not. But it's a risk and it's your own gamble. So on that, Andreas, I haven't heard of any problems. I haven't seen any problems with it. As far as I'm aware, Capture One haven't said it's yet supported, but I'm sure they will do at some point. So if anything, if you are using it and testing it and it's working fine, let them know, because everything out in the field is valuable. David, has Capture One improved their guides? I wouldn't say improve. So Prasad's covered. You can change the guide color, but there's still. I mean, it's a basic function, isn't it? Really, it's sort of horizontal, vertical. You can move them around. You can add new ones, but there's not really much other than, well, we can change it to yellow if we want to make it easier to see. But it's a basic guide, just as a guide would be in most other applications. Some, obviously, things like Illustrator or whatever, or even Photoshop for that matter, have Snap to, and so on. But because Capture One doesn't really have objects, it doesn't have edges to an object, all it has really is masks, which are typically soft-edged. It doesn't make sense to have any of the snap functions, so I'm not sure what they would add to make it better. The only thing personally that I would love is the ability for me to just right click on there and instead of all of this lot, say add another guide. Because that's kind of how I want to do it. I don't necessarily want to do it through keyboards and menu systems and so on. But no, it's a basic guide system. But one thing I will say is they are definitely horizontal and definitely vertical. And that will help you make sure your photos are too. Right, let's have a look through here. So back to Bob's question, which is how do I accentuate the light streams? This is the after, so this is with Bob's edits. It was Bob, wasn't it? Yes, cool. That could have been embarrassing. We called him the wrong name all the way through. So here's the original, relatively flat. Let's look at the histogram as well, because that tells us a big story. So a huge amount of data here in the sort of mid-tones to lower mid-tones. Softly falling off up here, so nothing really standing out in terms of high contrast. Nothing really there in the really dark shadows. There's probably a couple of dark bits here in the foliage, but in general what we're looking at is a big clump of data in the middle, which tells us it's a flat image, not much contrast, and that's what you're seeing on the screen. So what Bob's done is enhance that. So we're in a place where, yes, it's been crunched, as it were. Yes, it's been enhanced and accentuated. Has it specifically picked up on the light beams? I don't know. So I'm just going to show you. So rather than necessarily unpicking this edit, I'm just going to show you how we can just find the light beams to accentuate. And there's a very specific reason for that. Sorry, by the way, if my throat starts going, it's because it's still not quite right. My fault, not yours. But you can see, so if you look at this histogram here, from what it was to where it is. It's been stretched. We've got more contrast in there, and it started out from a completely flat place. Fine. Here's a fun one. If I change our curve to be linear response, it would flatten even more. But there's actually a reason maybe that we want to do that. So this is film standard or auto. In the case of a Fuji camera, if you've applied a film simulation, the auto takes the film simulation. But I believe, yeah, this is film standard, so there was no film simulation applied. But linear response effectively doesn't do that pop. So when we're looking at an image that comes into Capture One, imagine there's a special secret curve behind the scenes that happens before you even see this data. And that's the ICC curve. So in here, if I were to switch this to linear response, let's just create a new variant. So this is film standard. This is linear response. I haven't made any edits yet. This is purely Capture One saying, do I interpret it as film standard or interpret it as linear response? And look at the difference in the data and where it sits. Now, what actually goes on behind the scenes is down to Capture One, but in broad terms, film standard is going to put a little bit of an S-curve into it. So it's going to brighten some highlights, darken some shadows, give you a bit more contrast. It gives you that little pop. And that's what typically we see when you load in all your pictures into Capture One and import them. And then one by one, they go bing, 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 bing. That's Capture One applying the curve to those pictures. So you don't get the literal raw data. You get a, let's call it an enhanced version of that to start with. So in other words, when you start editing from this, it's not actually you're editing from raw. You're editing from an already enhanced, slightly altered version of raw, which is generally seen as the best way of getting good contrast, good color out of an average shot from your camera. But if I've got a subtle scene, and typically we're using linear response where there's too much contrast, so what I'm about to say is probably going to confuse some people. If we've got a really subtle scene, I kind of want to start from a really low contrast place so I can see all the different nuances, especially if we're going to be looking to highlight certain parts and add in extra contrast. So this would be the default. This is what I'm going to start from, which is linear response. Now, there's a second piece with this as well. In fact, we can even do it on the standard, the film standard one. If I want to see where the light streams are, and this is really important, if you are going to accentuate light streams, make sure you're doing that. You're accentuating them. You're not inventing them. This I see a lot. Let's create a new layer. Nice soft brush, so hardly any hardness. Low flow. We'll do it the David Grover style. And I'm going to put up maybe a stop of exposure. And I'm going to paint in some light streams because I like them. Yes. Wonderful. So I've now got this huge sun coming through some dappled leaves. Yes. Lovely. But they weren't the light streams. I've just invented that. I've made a piece of art, piece of bad art, but I've just made some art. But I'm not accentuating the photograph. I'm just adding light streams. So please don't fall into that trap. What we need to see is where the light streams really are to start with. And while we can see some, it can be a bit difficult, especially in the linear response sense. So we play Capture One in its own game. Capture One would have put in fact, let's just for completeness, I'm going to create this on a new filled layer so I can delete it in a minute. Okay, so Capture One would have put in a subtle S-curve, maybe like that. A bit of brightness or so. You know, it would have put in a bit of shadow in there. It would have done something like that to get us to film standard. Fine. But what I can do, just a little bit like the dust spot finder for those of you that have played with that, is really, really crank that up. So I can push this curve so that I can see, and remember what the curve is doing. So remember, we've got all this data that's actually, and this is the wrong place, and I'll show you why. All this data is sat in this lump here, but it's all compressed. it's all a big blob of data that's all very low contrast. And I want to see the tiny bits of contrast inside that bit of data. So in order to do that, I need to stretch that contrast. So going from one pixel to the next, or one value to the next, 125, 126, 127, one increment at a time isn't going to show me that. So what I'm going to do, let's just reset this. I'm going to place a midpoint in the middle of my data there. And now I'm going to stretch the upper part and lower the lower part. And now I can see exactly where those light streams are. This isn't our edit. Please don't take this as the edit. But look at how clear I can see things now. And that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for a guide as to where I need to build in some exposure to build on these light streams. Because here it's a little bit unclear. I can see there is one there. But that's so much easier, right? So with that underneath, let's create a new layer. Go back to my brush. Really, really soft layer, really, really low flow, even lower flow maybe. That'll do. And a new layer, remember. Don't worry about how messy this becomes, because remember, we've got an underlying curve in our little curve layer here that's going to make everything explode and go way over the top. But I'm okay with that. If I want straight light beams as well, by the way, so I'm going to click here, hold down the Shift key, and click at the end. And if I look at my mask, it's giving me a straight line. So we would click here, let's do it the other way, Shift key, click down the end, straight line, easy. If I don't want straight lines, or I want to be a bit more artistic, well, I can just still do my little streams. But you see now I'm actually following where the real light is, not inventing it. And yes, to JD's point, that was a little creepy, I'll admit that. That's not a normal yes. It was to prove the point, JD, don't worry. So let's enhance that bit a little bit more. Maybe we'll put a bit into there. So I'm just making sure that our angles also make sense, because typically the sun doesn't come from a flat place. It comes from one direction, not the band, the light source. Oh, pop culture, or what was. Right. So that sort of does me. Now this is a really, really ugly, map. So if I want to soften that a little bit, we're going to do a couple of things. Number one, we can feather that mask. That gives me a nice little soft radius. Great. So it forgives any edges. Number two, I can refine it a little bit. Now, if you do this too much, it's going to pick on all of that foliage. But if I do it a little bit less, I still keep my light streaks, but you see I'm starting to avoid some of the leaves on the outside, so we're not overdoing certain parts. And the whole goal of this is to make that look almost invisible. Now you'll notice that that mask at the moment is doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's no alteration whatsoever with the mask. So I'm going to turn my curve off. There's my linear response background. Let's up our exposure. Now that's too much in my view, but we could put it maybe one stop up. We could up some contrast. We could put a little bit of clarity in there. We could warm up the highlights. So we get some, we don't want green light, obviously, we don't want red light, but we can have some nice orangey light in there, even the midtones, we can go to there. So now we start to build almost a sort of a genuine sunshine feel to it, but only on that one layer where I've painted. And how did I know where I was painting? By adding in that curve so I can see where those light streams are. Now, this isn't finished, but I just want you to sort of see the difference to start with. So this is the edit that Bob sent in. You see it's very crunchy, it's very crispy, it's sort of very digital as a result. Here we're starting from a much softer, more organic place. We've got a calmer image, a softer palette, but we've then got very specific light trails in there. And those light trails, of course, I can, sorry, just naming it light streaks, I can reduce, I can enhance. So what I could do, and a lot of people would do it this way, so rather than one stop difference. Let's put a 2-stop difference in. A lot more contrast, but take the layer and pull its opacity down to maybe halfway, which means I've got the ability to turn up and down the amount of light in terms of trails or streaks that I'm adding in. Back to our image. So I'm going to get rid of that curve layer for now because I don't really need it anymore. So back to our main image, we're going to create a new filled adjustment layer. Prasad, I'll come on to your question in a second. The filled adjustment layer. So we've got a mask over everything. And here I'm going to do my global changes. So I might want to add in some general contrast. I might want to color grade. So I might want to say, well, actually, let's make our shadows a bit cooler. Quite like that. Our highlights a little bit more towards there. Maybe up to there. Quite like that. And again, this is just playing with style more than anything. This isn't necessarily the right answer. You can see, though, I'm grading from that sort of very green color to a bit more of a split tone, just because I think I prefer that. That's a personal thing. We can, ironically, dehaze this picture. Not too much. We've just added a load of haze in, effectively. But a little bit there on the background. And then maybe we go back to our light streaks layer and then add in some haze. So we go the other way. Again, not too much, but maybe down to sort of minus 30, something like that. So we're adding haze. Where was Bob's crop? It's a bit tighter than that, so it goes into there. So let's just go original. And I don't disagree with the crop, Bob. I mean, if you wanted just those trees in there, that sort of works. But I get to there. If I want to and add a lot more contrast in on that filled layer, I can now go into my levels and I can pull this in and I can pull our shadows up, which gets us into a much more contrasty place. But these streaks are just a little bit more subtle. And if I don't like how strong the streaks are, I can turn them down. I can get rid of them. That was the original image. Or I can boost them up, just maybe to there. But to my mind, that looks a little more real than this one here. This one starts to feel very digital, if you see what I mean, compared to the one on the right. This is purely personal taste. So to those that like the edit on the left, wonderful. There's no issue with it in terms of that. It's a style. It works. But if you wanted something that felt more organic in terms of those light trails or light streaks, doing that huge amount of clarity fix, all that's doing is it's crunching the edges. It's getting things over sharp. It's getting things over contrasty. And you're seeing here, it almost becomes quite digital. Let's just zoom in here. So around here, it's very, very binary. Whereas here, you know, look at all this detail in these leaves. I mean, I'm zooming in unfairly here. So we're at 300%. But here I'm washing stuff out, whereas here I've still got some of that detail in there. And to me, I think if it is something that's organic or foliage or forest or something like that, it needs to feel still a little bit organic to work. All that said, it's up to you. I could create this variant and I could go over the top a little bit with, let's try deep sky, just for fun. That sort of gives you a bit of a kick. So deep sky, not just for skies, obviously, but this would then give you, I guess, a sort of midway point. So there's Bob's original. That's a much softer one with the added light trails or light streaks. That one's with deep sky, and the deep sky brush is just adding a huge amount of contrast. Does stuff with blues. There's not really any blues in here to play with, but well, there is now that I've split toned it. But it's a version, and between those, yeah, you can make your pick. But light streaks in general, number one, if it's going to be a low contrast image and you're trying to add specific contrasting, consider, not always, but consider using linear response because it keeps the base image flat. Number two, use a curve to see where the actual light streaks are. Don't invent them. Don't guess them. It's a very simple curve. All you're doing is going into your curve tool, finding where the big data is, dropping a point in the middle, and then stretching either side of it, and it will just go bing, and then all of a sudden you'll be able to see all of that detail in the contrast. Right, Prasad, I said I'd come back. So how about a mask and a luma curve for highlights and or luma range on the mask? In theory, good idea. In practice, here's my problem. Where are my highlights? I don't have any. And because it's so crunched up in there, so let's go, let's just create this one back to raw. So here's my, effectively my raw one. So if I were to go and create a new filled layer, so what Prasad's talking about is whether you can use a luma range to only highlight the light streaks. Well, the problem is, let's have a look at those values for a start. Here's a light streak. It's what, look at the top here, because luma range is only looking at that luminosity. So 105, 104, 99, around there. Here's a light streak, 110. We know there's a light streak in here, 89. So what we're saying is anything between 89 and 110 is, as far as we're concerned, the light streak. Well, so's this tree then. And so's this grass. And so's this, and so's that, and so's that. It all sits in that range. So even if I didn't fill it, let's just say clear that mask. Let's say I'm going to go and put a light streak in here. Like that. And then let's use the theory of using a luma range to only pick on the light streak. So we get rid of the brightest parts. Starting to kick in. You see it's avoiding these parts of the trees. Remember we said it was something sort of 90 up to about 110-ish, something like that. So range of 90-ish. So it has got rid of the shadow parts of the tree. So let's apply that. But it's not really a nice light streak. If I compare that to the hand-drawn ones with a refine on there, this is, it's not doing the same thing. That's the problem. I would have to effectively feather that mask more and then refine it to get even close to that. And at that point, I'd be better off just using a bit of an artistic take on it. So I personally wouldn't do it with the Luma Range tool because, and this is the primary reason, Luma Range is great for separating things out based on their brightness. In this case here, everything in this picture is pretty much between about, I don't know, 60 up to 128. There's just not enough detail in there, or not enough difference in luminosity to be able to use the Luma Range to separate them out. Okay, Georg. We've got 3 pictures we're going to talk about. Ooh, fun. Someone asked me after last week's session, so if you are struggling with halos around objects, especially high contrast objects, whether that's because you've overdone HDR, so the shadow and highlight recovery, or because you put in too much clarity, watch last week, we cover that. But someone asked, how can I spot if there are halos as you're flicking through? And the answer actually, funnily enough, is exactly that. It's by flicking through. This picture here, if I start to zoom in, I don't really notice so much. And what's happening is, because the gradient is getting so spread out, I don't notice that there's a bit of a halo going on. But if I look at the value here, 97, 98, 90, 85, 84, 83, 80, it's getting darker. That color's getting dark, or that area is getting darker the further I go away from here. And if I do the same here, so we're at what? Oh, why is my... Did that last week, didn't it? Are there any problems with 16.4.2? Maybe. So 98 here, right by the mast, or whatever it is, lighthouse buoy, whatever. And then slowly 90, 89, 87, 86. So unless the sun was here, which it isn't, we can see from the direction, it doesn't make sense that the sky's getting brighter here and then darker elsewhere. But there's an even easier giveaway, and you can see this on your screens right now in YouTube, I hope. Here is the raw. Here is the edit. Look at your preview. So halos have this really handy feature, which is when you zoom out and you look at a small preview in a browser like this, even if I make it bigger so you can see the halo more obviously the smaller the picture. And the reason is because that gradient that's going from that area is getting smaller and smaller, so the difference in a short space of area or distance becomes more obvious. So I would implore you, if you want to check for halos, don't zoom in, zoom out. And as you zoom out, or use your your browser, as it were, to be able to double check, have a look here. If you're seeing halos around objects, chances are when you look in closely, that's what's happening. And the giveaway, use your mouse, go over here with your pointer and look at, is the area next to my object getting brighter and then slowly darker as it gets further away? If it is, it might make sense. Maybe the sun's here. Maybe that's fading off, but it's not. And I look at this side again, lighter through to darker. Some of that is a vignette for sure. It's getting darker out towards the edges. But if it were a pure vignette, it would be surely brightest in the middle and then getting darker as it went out, not the other way around. So this one does have some halos on it. It is not, funnily enough, all about clarity in this case. There is quite a bit of clarity loaded in. There's a bit of dehaze. That's also adding some elements of clarity. But you've also got, on one of these, I think, a contrast bump. And there was another one on Not Sky with a shadow recovery. So all those things compound. So clarity addition, dehazing, shadow recovery or shadow enhancement, contrast, all of those things around the same or similar sort of area are all going to compound into giving you what looks like a glow because of that contrast change that has to happen between the darker object and the lighter. So for more of that, look last week. We won't bore everyone that's back on there again, but have a look, because we can. There are ways of fixing this. A lot of it is to do with feathering, and a lot of it is to do with tempering that. This one, Georg, I just wanted to touch on because here's our raw, here's the edit, and if I go to before and after, we can see most of this work was around effectively building this to be somewhat more impressive out here. So bright playing castle, we've got a sky layer here, lots and lots and lots of little alterations, some pretty heavy stuff around, lifting whites way up, which is getting you your cloud enhancement. Ironically then pulling highlights down, so there's a bit of a contradiction in there, but one way or another, quite a few things used up here in the exposure and HDR area to make that sky pop. Without it, the sky's a little bit flat. Without the mountains, they're a bit flat. So overall, no issue. But I think you could have saved yourself some time. Please, please, for those of you that are on anything in the last, must be 3 years now, something like that, don't forget you've got style brushes. We even put in, as part of our style pack, it comes with a traffic trail brush. So when you put on the style pack that we produced for Capture One, so for those of you that don't have it, you'll see under custom styles, elevation, there's a new one for what was version 23, but current. This style pack, yes, comes with different styles, but it also comes with a rather handy little brush for traffic trails, which picks up on lights in cityscapes and you can brush them on. But built into Capture One, you've also got all these other ones. So you've got ones for brightness, you've got dodge and burn, you've got whiten teeth, you've got cool down, color balance, you've got increased saturation, but do it slowly so it doesn't go over the top. Red skin reduction, really handy. And you've got deep sky. Deep sky is wonderful for lots of things, like one click. So yes, this one here it's fine as an edit, no issue with it. Well done, Georg, it works. But I could have done that sky thing in pretty much one click. I might have taken the deep sky layer and then just warmed up a little bit so it's not quite so cold. But I get there very quickly using one brush. And anyone that's in the current version or recent version of Capture One, you've all got these. They're all built in. Please don't forget they're there. Use the functions that are in there. You've paid for them. And Deep Sky is one of the most powerful ones, especially for, well, ironically, skies. Well, not ironically, that's literally what it's designed for. But it also works, as you saw before, forests. It works for anything that you need to add a huge amount of contrast to very quickly, but without necessarily making the colors overly saturated. It will make things a bit bluer, will make things a bit whiter, but other than that, does a pretty good job. So yeah, please don't forget, you've already got these. They're in there. You paid for them. Use them. Okay. And then we're going to focus on this one. So Georg sent this one in. It is ostensibly an architecture shot. Challenge from Georg. No tripod, high ISO, lots or not very much contrast. So let's have a look at before and after. And I agree there's not a lot of contrast, but actually I would go further and say there's less contrast in the black and white version than there was in the color. Now that's weird because normally we'd be seeing more. Normally we use black and white to sort of punch some contrast in there. So I'd be sensitive to why we're doing stuff in black and white. The other problem as well is, as a result of taking away some of the color, we've actually seemingly increased the amount of noise that you can see. So you can see in here, this is the color version here. Let's just zoom in so you can see it on screen. Yes, there's some noise, but when I pull the black and white one in, look at how horrible that noise becomes. There to there. So it's actually accentuating the noise, it's enhancing the noise, the opposite of what we want. We want to hide that. So I'm going to create a new variant. No, let's clone it. Clone the variant. Now this noise here is actually from noise reduction in part. So go into my image layer and I'm going to go into our noise reduction here. I'm just going to turn it off briefly and on again. So off and on. So it's done a little bit of a job, but look at this layer. And this is the bit that I missed earlier. Just like sharpening, just like clarity, just like HDR, the second you start layering noise reduction or layering sharpening on top of each other, it becomes cumulative. And you get noise reduction trying to reduce already reduced noise. Now, as we know, when you start reducing noise, you risk adding in artifacts. What do we mean by artifacts? Little shapes and stuff like this. So just be careful with that. But in this case, the base image layer has already got some noise reduction done. What's happened is on the basic edits layer, Georg's added a load more noise reduction. So if I get rid of that, yes, it is noisier, but that to me almost looks like grain. This looks like a problem. So at most, I'd be a little bit more than that, but not too much. Now then comes the problem of why is it now more accentuated? Well, it's because we've got sharpening, we've got clarity, we've got contrast, we've got the exposure lifting and so on. And it's taking what was a relatively smooth surface and it's making it really, really, really grainy and rough. So to me, and this is, again, personal choice, doesn't necessarily mean it's the right answer. I am going to, what shall I do? I'm going to reset. Pardon me. We're going to go from the base edit because I want to show you the build-up of this and the decision-making process. So number one, we've got a lean in this shot. Well, that's an easy fix because we've now got auto keystone. So let's do that one. Lovely. One click. Oh, life's easy, right? Then we've got this crop thing in here, and Georg has already done that, so we'll do the same. We'll go into the original aspect ratio, pull in maybe there and to there. So that's similar, I think, to where you were. Oh, you actually came in closer. I'm going to leave this in there because I quite like, yeah, I think I quite like this bit in here. Okay, so we could do some diffraction correction. I mean, it's at f8. I don't know whether the lens was any good in that sense. 5.6. Let's just put it in and see whether it improves things. It may not do, but let's have a little look. Yeah, a little bit of sharpness increase. Okay, not worried about any of the other stuff, but what I am going to do, just as a bit of an experiment, is go into my built-in styles, black and white, and I'm going to go black and white punch maybe, or do we go soft and keep it clean? I'm going to go punch. Okay. So these styles are built into your Capture One. You don't have to worry, as in you don't have to do anything special to it. They're part of your Capture One. There's some, I guess it's sample ones if you want to call it that. But what we can do is we can actually combine, as a result of a few years or a few versions ago, we can add and add and add on top of other ones to combine layers. So I'm sort of in a place of, maybe that's quite nice. I'm going to right click and go to apply this one to a new layer. So I've now got Cozy Fall and Black and White Punch on there. So Black and White Punch is applied to the background layer. Black and white conversions can only happen on backgrounds as it stands right now. And then I've got Cozy Fall on top, but I've got an opacity control with that, so I can effectively control how much of that I want. So we'll go with that. And let's go on to our image layer. Now what this has done by the look of it is increased, I was going to say some of the sharpness, but it has increased some of this noise a little bit. This is the thing with noise, isn't it? Am I that worried about it? Because actually the fix is not necessarily better than the issue. And I see this with a lot of denoise applications. A lot of the time when you look at the final version that's come out of a denoise, the extra stuff it's added in there has actually made the image worse overall, to the point where I'd have rather stuck with the noise in the first place, to be honest. Now we can, on here, let's just put a little bit of luminance noise correction. There's a bit of color noise in there. Single pixel, just in case there were any hot pixels, but actually no, there wouldn't have been. It was a 320th of a second, and more importantly, it was handheld, so there's no way it was long exposure. There are some bits up here that we might want to heal out. Remember as well with noise, do not ever make a noise decision zoomed out. Zoom in, please, when you're doing that. Halos, zoom out. Noise, zoom in. There you go, tip for the day. So a quick heal of that. And maybe these wood, or these little roof access hatch things or whatever. Let's just get this one. Let's see if it can do it. Can it do it? Don't take it from there. So if you don't like where Capture One takes the healing point from, move it and tell it that you want it to go somewhere different. I want it to take this line here. Good. Okay, this is overall a little bit too dark and too flat. So I'm going to go back to my image layer. Let's have a look at this here. And we're going to see, yeah, we've got some highlight drop. Now remember, so here's a fun one, contrast. So we've added loads of contrast, so it should have got brighter. Well, no. The contrast tool is going to make bright areas brighter and dark areas darker. So where we've got a little bit of contrast in the original image, this has just made those darker areas, the shadows, go really, really dark. So as I pull back contrast, it's actually going to lighten up, because most of our data is down here. We could lift, and it's interesting as well, isn't it? We've lifted the shadows in this as part of this black and white conversion. Remember, this is the style that we applied, so it was a choice. But that's the thing that you just got to be aware of. So if we wanted the whites to stand out, then we can lift up whites there. That gives this a really strong glow. I'm going to back away that contrast a little bit. I'm going to leave the brightness where it was and then pull up exposure a touch. Okay. Now there are other things we could do with this shot. But if I look at there to there, this one just feels so much more industrial. It feels more designed. It feels like there's some shape to it, whereas here it just felt a little bit flat. Now this depends on what the output was for. So if it is for the people that make these steel columns, well, maybe we do want to see this in more detail. But if I want one that's going to capture my attention and be a really strong, bold image, I'm going to go with that one, personally. We can shift with a little bit of a curve. So at the moment, there's already a curve in there, and that's because of that black and white conversion. I could lift a bit more contrast in there, so I can lift up the shadows a touch and then bring our mid-tones up. So that gives us a bit more soft contrast in the middle. But to me, that's just such a stronger picture than here. The before shot is the same. It's the same place. We could turn off the black and white with this one. So if we clone that variant, go to our black and white tool and just disable it. we're back to the colors. The issue is I've been designing that shot for black and white. So what you see here, this unevenness in these lights up here. Well, I don't worry about them here, but I do here. So to me, this is one where last week I talked about get it looking great in color and then convert to black and white if you're unsure. If I'm sure this is going to be in black and white, then just get it right in black and white from the beginning. And then there's a couple of little bits to heal. You know, I might want to take little bits of, I guess, debris out. Don't know what they are. You know, there's a little dust spot there. But again, if we're doing detail work, always zoom in and don't worry too much about noise that's natural. I mean, it was shot at ISO 3200. That's never going to be completely clean. Don't worry too much in that sense. But yes, you don't want it to be completely covered in grain or noise. That's just distracting. But the irony is by overdoing it, and I just want to reiterate this point, I don't have any artifacts or weird shapes in my conversion here. I do here. This is at 91%. If I zoom in on both of them to 100, so I then get to a place where I'd actually prefer this one because it doesn't have the artificial artifacts that come with trying to reduce the noise, these shapes and everything up here. David, yeah, in general, I like to see black, blacks, white, whites, and tones. That was the Ansel Adams thing, wasn't it? The, can't remember what it's called, the scale. Yes, so the darkest part of the image should be 0, the brightest part should be 255, and then anything in between. But if we were to do that, and let's do it with levels. So let's just have a little look. Where's our levels here? Let's go on to our image layer. And let's just make sure that the black is black, and we'll allow those whites to overexpose. So that gets you the, I'll just move these here and here, just for those that couldn't see it under the comment. That gets us the very harsh contrast. This to me is probably a compromise, this being the original. To me, that is just too soft. It's not quite there. This one is just a bit stronger. This one is much stronger, but you're also crushing some of those shadows as well. So just be conscious of that. And Prasad, I think it needs some keystone correction. Funnily enough, by turning on my guides, we don't really have any horizontals in here. The issue is this line here. I think this roof is giving us a weird approach, but I'm looking there, that is level. I'm looking at that doorway, which is level. I'm looking at this frame, which is level. I'm looking at this silo, which is level, and I'm looking at this edge, which is also level. So vertically, no issue. Horizontally, maybe a challenge, maybe a problem. So let's just have a little look at whether we do a horizontal keystone instead. So I'm going to leave our baseline down here. Actually, no, we need to pull that. So let's pull this down. I'm going to keep the vertical where it was. And I'm just bringing our horizontal to match the line that this ceiling is giving us. Just for everyone's reference, before I hit the OK button, this is going to go wrong. I don't think this is the right thing to do. But let's hit apply. Okay, we have a straighter corridor-ish, the roof. Whether it's better, right, I don't know. We'd have to play with it. The short answer with this is if you really want to get into really strong architectural photography with true verticals, true horizontals, you need to be on a shift lens, at least a tilt shift lens potentially as well for focus. But on a standard flat plane lens, especially a wide one at 10 mil, so 16 mil equivalent, you're always going to have some sort of keystone or perspective correction to do. The problem with that keystoning is, as you can see from the amount that's lost here, the more and more correction we do, the more and more of the image we lose. So, right, we are quickly going to go on to Henry's request just before we finish. Well, we have done 4 or 5 pictures. It's just 3 of them with cures. So this one here, this is what I alluded to earlier. So the question from Henry was, what's the best way in Capture One to take this yellow here and replace this window light here? Let's get rid of those guides. So the answer is not in Capture One, if I'm honest. Capture One isn't a paint tool. It's not designed to go into pixel level detail. It doesn't have generative AI at the moment. Who knows in the future? But the point being, while I can use the clone tool, and you'd mentioned that you had used clone in there. If I take, for instance, here and start painting a mask in here, obviously that's going to be really difficult because of the area around the dog. I could make that mask a... Can I actually? Ooh. Can I make an AI mask as a clone? I don't think I can, no. I don't think you can use AI on the clone layer. What I could do, however, is draw on my clone layer a very rough area. So I'm going to do this really badly, just for the sake of it. So in my clone tool, source there. Let's make sure we've got a strong opacity. So this is going to be wrong, but it's just going to see if we can do something. In there, no, I can't do a luma range on it either. Can't refine it. The clone mask is as rudimentary as it can pretty much get. So in this case here, it's not really a Capture One job. Capture One is great at doing the color management side of things, the global adjustments, the perspective stuff. It can do subject stuff now. It can do really, really tight refinements around something. So if, for instance, I wanted to pick on this dog here, let's click there. The AI mask, you saw how quickly that did that. Yes, there's a couple of bits that are not necessary in there. So let's go onto the AI eraser. Let's zoom in because it becomes a little bit more accurate when I do that. So AI eraser into here. No, not accurate enough. But if I really want to get hold of that dog on its own, we can go to refine mask. I can ramp that up. We could then use a standard eraser and pretty easily get a lovely mask around one animal. Again, doing it rough just to make the point. And then with that dog, we could, we could make them yellow, but more likely we probably increase some clarity, increase some structure, maybe put a bit of contrast in and darken down. So yes, I've got decent masking in there, but that masking isn't designed to go from one area to another as a sort of pixel replacement. What is good at this stuff is pixel editors. So if you go into something like Photoshop, why is that doing that? Thank you. So I'm going to edit with, and in fact, we're just going to open it with, actually, open with Photoshop. It's a phone image. I could, so there are several things that I can do, and I'm going to do this so quickly that please never ever do what I'm about to do. It's not meant to be done that way, but I can pick on the stamp tool. I could choose this as my source, and I could paint over here. Let's just make sure we're at 100%. Oh, let's go to normal first. So I can paint over here. Don't like that bit, so let's go to there. Great, so I'm just building up on my yellow, and I could do this with some, I could be a bit kinder with the joins. I could make it a little more subtle. I could use a healing brush to really join it in. Now the problem is obviously we've gone over parts of the dog's ear. So what we do then is we don't do that on its own layer. We just going to undo that and then paste in a new layer. Right, so with that, I'm going to go to, let's say, darken as my layer mode. So I can get away with a really quick way of painting in. And it's these layer modes that we don't have in Capture One. Same with brush modes. So I could pick up the color yellow, and with my brush, I could say mode darken, and it will only paint where yellow is darker than what's in front of me. So I can do this really quickly in there. Yes, you do it better than this. So please, you do it better than this. Don't do it like this. But you can see this is literally a painting job, not a development or a processing job. There are some fun bits with this. So let's say we wanted to, let's see if Photoshop can do it. I'm going to pretty much guarantee it doesn't do what I want it to do. So generative fill, let's say replace white background with more yellow wall. I'm not holding out much hope. Let's see what 3 options it comes up with. Come on. God, the excitement. Okay. It has done something. It's done a decent cutout around the dog. Bit too yellow, that one. Yeah, a bit over the top. But generative fill can do this stuff for you. We could do the same. Let's I don't think it's going to understand my sense of humor, but let's see. Add a unicorn flying outside through the window. Why not? Now, the point being, and I'm being stupid here, there's a point where trying to do this in Capture One, that's not a unicorn, that's a canoe paddle. That has, oh dear. Yeah, anyway, so let's stick with the basics. We can do it through brushing. We can do it through some forms of generative AI. But the point being, if you try and do this in Capture One, you are going to hit your head against a brick wall several times really hard. You're not going to have fun. You're going to start hating the software. Not because the software is not capable of doing things, but it's not designed to do certain things that you're trying to force it to. This is a perfect example. If you're trying to do big area replacements or detail replacements in backgrounds, and we don't even have enough of this yellow really to replace that, use a pixel editor. It doesn't have to be Photoshop. It can be Affinity. It can be any of the other ones that are out there. But do use the right tool. And in this case, Capture One wouldn't be the one that I'd choose, but I would use Capture One for all the other edits, the basics. Right click and then edit with rather than open with, and it will apply those edits to the version that comes up into that pixel editor, and you're going to have a much easier time playing with that. All the description said in your dramatic reader voice. I should be the new AI voice. I could do the Scarlet thingy. Anyway, right. So today, when not to use Capture One. Let's cover that one for Henry. Sorry, Henry. This one here for Georg. To me, architecture shots kind of need contrast, and sometimes trying to remove the noise, just be careful that you're not adding in artifacts that are equally as distracting. Always do your noise correction at 100%, never do it zoomed out. Always check for halos zoomed out, never do it at 100%, as we've discovered. This one here, we can do a huge amount of stuff with individual layers, but don't forget you've got built-in brushes. So these style brushes came with your Capture One. Use them, play with them. They do a great job in certain circumstances. And then to start with, Bob, light streaks. Number one, don't invent light streaks. Work out using curves where they are naturally occurring. Add some in, enhance them, accentuate them, and then play with color grading, so you don't end up with quite so much crispiness in there. It still remains relatively organic. And that's us for today. Yay! Right, so that's us, I think, for this week. It will also be us for next week. So next time I see you will be in 2 weeks' time, on the 18th of June. So that'll be exciting. Same time, same place. For those of you in the meantime that want to catch up, that's the place to go to, because we'll have discussions about things, including next masterclass stuff as well. Of that masterclasses, you'll find the link in there if you want to learn more about things like black and white conversions or color grading and styles and stuff like that. But in the meantime, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.